By 1976, a company that didn't exist 10 years earlier had made nearly every professional chainsaw in Scandinavia obsolete. Not Stihl, not Husqvarna, not any of the century-old European giants who'd built their empires on timber and war. A workshop in Tokyo, 3 engineers, and a single obsessive fixation on a problem everyone else had decided to ignore. Shindaiwa didn't invent the chainsaw. They didn't pioneer 2-stroke engines. They didn't even make their first saw until 1969, 2 full decades after the chainsaw market had already matured, consolidated, and calcified around a handful of European names. What they did invent was something far stranger, and the reason the company's founder, Masanori Yokoyama, refused to let a single Shindaiwa saw be sold through a hardware store or retail chain for nearly 8 years tells you everything about why they won. But it also tells you why, in 1985, the company buried a single technical detail so deep in their own service manuals that even their authorized dealers weren't allowed to mention it. Tokyo, 1955. The Ginza district is still rubble in places. You can smell burnt wood and oil and the wet ash of a city that hasn't fully exhaled yet. Yokoyama is 26. He works in a machine shop no bigger than a 2-car garage, rebuilding small engines, lawn equipment, irrigation pumps, the kind of forgettable machinery that keeps a post-war economy stitching itself back together. He's good at it. Quiet, methodical, the kind of engineer who doesn't speak unless the math demands it. But he has a problem. Not with the work, with the weight. Every 2-stroke engine that comes through his shop, every chainsaw, every brush cutter, every motor built in Europe or America carries the same flaw. They're too heavy for the power they produce. The metallurgy is brute force, steel where aluminum could live, cast iron where magnesium alloys should breathe. It's 1950s engineering, built for durability, yes, built to survive abuse in logging camps and construction sites, but built with no consideration for the human being who has to carry it up a mountain. Yokoyama doesn't say this out loud. Not yet. He just starts sketching. In the back of the shop, on graph paper stolen from a supplier, he begins redesigning the crankcase. The obsession is thermal efficiency, not horsepower, not displacement. Weight per unit of energy transfer. It's an equation most manufacturers don't bother with. Stihl saws in the 1950s weigh 16, 18, sometimes 22 pounds. Husqvarna's top models are worse. They're designed for 2-man crews, 1 operator, 1 support. The assumption is that professional loggers are strong, expendable, and replaceable. Yokoyama works alone. He's not building for teams. He's building for the single operator who'll be 12 miles into a forest with no backup, no second saw, and no margin for failure. But here's the thing. He's not building chainsaws yet. Not even close. For the first 14 years, Yokoyama's company, Shindaiwa Kogyo, founded in 1955, makes brush cutters. Small 2-stroke engines mounted to a pole with a spinning nylon head. Glorified weed whackers, boring, unglamorous, profitable, and completely deliberate. Because while Stihl and Husqvarna are locked in a horsepower war, adding weight and displacement to win logging contracts, Yokoyama is learning how to make a 2-stroke engine disappear. Magnesium aluminum alloy crankcases, titanium piston rods, carburetors machined to tolerances tighter than anything in the agricultural sector. By 1968, Shindaiwa's brush cutters weigh 40% less than comparable European models and run 11% cooler under sustained load. That's when he makes the decision that nearly bankrupts him. He's going to build a chainsaw, not for the Japanese market. Japan's domestic logging industry is tiny, fragmented, dominated by imports. There's no patriotic angle, no government contract waiting. He's going to build it for Scandinavia, the single most competitive professional chainsaw market on Earth. And he's going to do it with a saw that weighs 9 pounds, fully fueled. To understand how insane this is, you need to know what 9 pounds meant in 1969. Still's lightest professional braid saw, 14 pounds. Husqvarna's top forestry model, 16. McCulloch, the American upstart, 13 and a half. Every one of them requires a two-hand carry and a back harness for extended use. Every one of them assumes the operator will rotate saws throughout the day to avoid muscle fatigue. Yokoyama's design assumes you'll forget you're holding it, and that's exactly the problem. Because when the first prototype, the Shindaiwa 340, ships to a forestry co-op in southern Sweden in early 1970, the operators don't believe it's real. They think it's a demonstration model, a plastic mock-up. There's no way a saw this light has a 34cc engine, a hardened steel chain, and enough torque to drop a 60-foot pine. So they test it the way you test something you assume will fail. They run it for 6 hours straight, full throttle, wet oak, frozen birch, knotted spruce that would chew up a steel blade in 40 minutes. The 340 doesn't overheat, doesn't stall, doesn't seize, it just cuts. By the end of the day, the lead operator's hands don't hurt. That's the moment everything changes. See, the European manufacturers had built their entire value proposition on endurance, the idea that their saws were tough enough to survive anything. They marketed indestructibility, but they'd accidentally trained an entire generation of loggers to accept chronic pain as part of the job. Wrist strain, shoulder damage, lower back collapse from carrying 20-pound saws up slopes for 8 hours. It was just the cost of working timber, until it wasn't. So what problem did Shindaiwa solve that the European giants couldn't? Not power, not durability, cumulative fatigue. Yokoyama's obsession with weight per watt wasn't about making a lighter saw. It was about making a saw you could operate for 10 hours without destroying your body. The magnesium aluminum crankcase wasn't just a material swap, it was a harmonic damper, absorbing vibration frequencies that traditional cast iron housings amplified directly into the operator's joints. The titanium piston rods weren't about strength, they were about thermal mass reduction, which meant the engine stayed cool enough that you didn't need oversized cooling fins, which saved another 8 ounces. Every gram Yokoyama removed had a physiological purpose. And the European companies had no answer, because they'd never thought to ask the question. Still's first response, in 1971, was to claim the 340 couldn't be a real professional saw, not at that weight. It had to be a homeowner model, rebranded. Husqvarna's engineers requested a teardown. When they got one, they went silent for 6 months. Because the problem wasn't that they couldn't build what Shindaiwa had built. It's that they couldn't build it profitably. Yokoyama's tolerances required machine tooling that cost 4 times what European factories were using. His alloy suppliers were aerospace subcontractors. His quality control rejection rate was 18%, meaning nearly 1 in 5 saws that came off the line got torn back down and rebuilt. A Still saw in 1972 cost $280 retail and netted the company about $95 in margin. A Shindaiwa 340 cost $310 and netted the company $14. Yokoyama didn't care. He wasn't trying to win market share. He was trying to prove the equation worked, and the equation was simple. If you make the saw light enough and reliable enough, the operator becomes more productive. More cuts per day, less downtime, less injury, less turnover. Which brings us back to the second question. Why wouldn't Yokoyama let his saws be sold in hardware stores? Because he knew that the moment Shindaiwa entered retail distribution, the equation would break. A retail buyer doesn't feel cumulative fatigue in the aisle. They feel price. They pick up a Shindaiwa, pick up a Stihl, and the Stihl feels more substantial, heavier, more serious. The Shindaiwa feels like a toy. So Yokoyama made a decision that should have killed the company. Shindaiwa saws would only be sold through direct partnerships with professional forestry co-ops, arborist networks, and utility contractors, organizations that could mandate a 30-day field trial before purchase. No retail, no catalogs, no hardware chains. If you wanted a Shindaiwa, you had to use one first. It was commercial suicide. Except it wasn't. Because the loggers who tried the 340 didn't just buy one. They replaced their entire fleet. By 1974, Shindaiwa had 71% market penetration in Norway's state forestry service. By 1976, they were the primary contractor for Sweden's municipal tree services. By 1978, they'd moved into utility line clearing in the American South, a market Stihl had owned for 20 years. And they did it with a saw that still only netted $14 per unit. So how did they survive? Service contracts. Shindaiwa didn't make money on the saw. They made money on the relationship. Every co-op that adopted the 340 signed a 3-year service agreement, replacement parts, seasonal tune-ups, operator training. The contracts were expensive, non-negotiable, and extremely profitable. And they locked customers in so deeply that switching back to Stihl meant eating the remaining contract term. But in 1982, something happened that Yokoyama didn't plan for. The American homeowner market exploded. Cheap land, suburban expansion, every new house on a half-acre lot with trees that needed trimming. Big box stores like Home Depot and Lowe's started stocking chainsaws next to lawnmowers and hedge trimmers. Stihl and Husqvarna pivoted instantly. Lighter homeowner models, bright orange plastic, retail-friendly packaging, and they started winning again. Because Yokoyama's professional-only distribution model had no access to the fastest-growing segment in the industry. Shindaiwa's sales plateaued in 1983, dipped in 1984. The company had a choice: break the model or die slowly. Yokoyama refused to break. Instead, he did something stranger. He released a homeowner model, but he didn't sell it in stores. The Shindaiwa 150, 11 pounds, 30 cubic centimeters engine, cream-colored plastic housing instead of magnesium. It looked like every other homeowner saw on the market. Except for one thing. The engine was identical to the one in the 340 professional model. Same crankcase, same piston assembly, same carburetor, same vibration damping. The only differences were cosmetic: the housing, the handlebar design, the bar length. Under the plastic, it was the same saw that Norway's forestry service had trusted for a decade, and Shindaiwa told no one. The 150 launched in 1985 with almost no advertising, no press releases, no dealer training. It was listed in the catalog as an entry-level residential model, available only through the same co-op and contractor networks that sold the professional line. The margins were better, $34 per unit instead of $14, but the volume was tiny. It should have been a footnote, until a landscaping contractor in North Carolina bought 40 of them. He wasn't buying them for homeowners. He was buying them for his crew. Because the 150 was $70 cheaper than the 340, light enough for all-day use, and, once his mechanic tore one down and confirmed it, mechanically identical where it mattered. Within 6 months, landscaping networks across the Southeast figured out the same thing. The homeowner saw was a professional saw in disguise. By 1987, the 150 was outselling the 340 in the US market by a ratio of 4-to-1. Shindaiwa's revenue doubled, and the European manufacturers had no idea why, because Shindaiwa never marketed it, never explained it, never confirmed it. The detail they buried in 1985, the fact that the 150 shared the same engine platform as their flagship professional saw, wasn't a secret. It was just never said. And in the service manuals, in the parts diagrams, the engine assemblies for both models shared the same SKU. Authorized dealers were told not to compare the models, not to upsell, not to explain, just to let the customers figure it out themselves. Because the moment Shindaiwa told people the 150 was a professional-grade saw in a plastic shell, it stopped being valuable. It became a deal, a hack, a budget option. But as long as it was a secret you had to discover, it was yours. By 1990, Shindaiwa owned 28% of the North American professional chainsaw market. But Yokoyama was already dying. Lung cancer. Diagnosed in 1989. He kept working until he physically couldn't, showing up to the Tokyo workshop in a wheelchair, reviewing tolerance specs, arguing with engineers about magnesium brain structure. He died in April 1991. The company he built survived, but it didn't stay independent. In 1998, Yamabiko Corporation, a Japanese conglomerate that also owned Echo Power Equipment, acquired Shindaiwa. The saws kept the name, kept the design philosophy, but the service contract model disappeared. The direct sales-only distribution rule was quietly dropped. By 2005, you could buy a Shindaiwa at a Lowe's in suburban Atlanta, and the thing that made them different started to blur. Today, Shindaiwa still makes chainsaws. They're still lighter than most European models, still well regarded by arborists and utility crews. But they're not necessary anymore. Still caught up, Husqvarna invested in ergonomic redesigns. Battery-powered saws from Makita and DeWalt have made weight almost irrelevant. The gap Yokoyama exploited, the thing no one else was paying attention to, closed. But here's what didn't close. If you go to a professional arborist conference today, anywhere in North America or Scandinavia, and you look at the saws hanging off the crew's belts, you'll see something strange. Still, Husqvarna, Echo, DeWalt, and a small, quiet percentage of Shindaiwa. Not the new models, the old ones. 340s from the 1970s, still running. 150s from the late 80s, rebuilt 3 times, still in daily rotation. They're not collectibles. They're not nostalgia pieces. They're just tools that refuse to die. And if you ask the operators why they haven't upgraded, you get the same answer every time. It still works, and my wrists don't hurt. That's the thing about solving a problem no one else acknowledged. You don't win by being the loudest, or the fastest, or the cheapest. You win by making something so obviously correct that even decades later, people can't find a reason to replace it. But there's one more thing. In 2003, a forestry equipment historian in Oslo requested access to Shindaiwa's original design archive, the sketches and prototypes Yokoyama made between 1955 and 1969, before the first 340 shipped. Yamabiko's response was polite and absolute. The archive was destroyed in a fire in 1994. There's no record of a fire, no insurance claim, no news coverage, no mention in any corporate history. And when a retired Shindaiwa engineer was asked about it in 2011, he said something strange. Yokoyama didn't want anyone to know how simple it was. Because if the European manufacturers had seen the early sketches, if they'd understood that the whole system was just a matter of asking a different question, they could have copied it in 6 months. But they never got the chance. Somewhere in a workshop in Tokyo, in 1968, a man with graph paper and a micrometer decided that weight mattered more than heritage, that the absence of pain was worth more than the presence of power, that the tool should disappear so the work could remain, and he built a company that won by making people forget they were holding a chainsaw. The saws are still out there, lighter than they should be, running longer than they have any right to, and no one at Yamabiko will tell you what's left in the archive.